This is the third chair is yours. Znowu się zgubiłem. Gdzie my jesteśmy? Tu. Czyli tu masz panią skrypnik. To jest chyba to. Tak. Tak. Dobra. Ciach. 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 Skrypnik. I tu masz furwię, ona jest ostatnia.
Czyli na pierwszym sesji wszystkich mamy.
Tak.
Okay. Tak samo
Już,
z pytaniami
co,
też.
zrobię ci trójkę, już mi się nie chce pisać.
Jasne, okej.
Tu jeszcze zerknę, tak, czy ona nie ma jakichś notatek przypadkiem. Widok, notatki. Nie ma. Myślałem, ona nigdy nie ma.
Z tym Bujalskim.
Słucham?
Z Bujalskim.
Co z Bujelskim?
Bo on dał z notatkami, tak?
Wydrukowaliśmy mu notatki. Bo tu nie będzie miał podglądu, więc wydrukowaliśmy mu notatki, żeby miał przed sobą.
Bo on ma... Dobra, czyli w razie czego jakąś tam jego prezentację...
Mamy już.
Tak?
Wczoraj mi przesłałeś.
No tak, ale z notatkami.
No tak, ale to tutaj nie pójdzie, tu pójdzie bez notatek na ekran. Notatki ma tu, bo widzisz, on ma takie rzeczy pod slajdami, że sobie tam coś, wiesz, no żeby mu było łatwiej, nie? To o to chodzi.
Bo on coś mi dzwonił, że on...
Żeby nie dawać na pena.
żeby
Ja z nim pogadam, jak się pojawi.
O to chodzi.
No.
O to chodzi, żebyś z nim
Bo
pogadał.
ja mogę to spdf-ować i wtedy nie będzie jego notatek, nie?
No tak. To czy on te notatki będzie widział?
Teraz tu?
Tak.
Tu dostanie na papierze, mówię ci. Tu ma, zobacz. Idzie do mównicy, tu ma pierwszy slajd swój, a tu ma notatki do tego slajdu. Wczoraj tak robił wieczorek.
Wieczorek tak robi.
Tak,
Dobra.
bo nie mamy teraz, wiesz, jeśli operujemy w ten sposób tym laptopem,
Tak.
to nie ma możliwości
Tak.
wyświetlenia tych notatek, bo one by się musiały wszystkim wyświetlać.
Tak,
To by było...
tak. Okej, rozumiem. Dobra.
No, czyli tu mamy ogarnięte w miarę.
Tak samo pytanie, jeżeli będą, to też
No,
chodzić normalnie.
nie wiem, czemu nam dwa dali mikrofony. To powinno być na stół te mikrofony tak naprawdę.
Obydwa na stół, tak?
Czekaj, kto tu wieczorek? Tak, ja bym tutaj obydwa na stół. Tam do ich tym też wieczorek, bo on jest moderatorem i tu może, wiesz, zrobić tu.
Okej.
A jak to, wiesz, były pytania czy coś, to po prostu zabierz jeden.
Szanowni Państwo,
Dear colleagues, we are ready to start the first session today. Thank you very much for joining us at this early hour. This session is going to concern behavioral addictions, and we are going to look at them from various perspectives. My name is Łukasz Wieczorek. I'm from the Institute of Psychiatry and Neurology, and I'm going to moderate this session. The first presentation is going to be about the non-substance addictions as a product of culture. And the authors of these presentations are Vadim Chukhnov and Anna Skripnik. They come from the National Medical University in Zaporizhia in Ukraine. Vadim is not with us today here, but we are going to hear the slides from Anna Skripnik. She's a doctorate candidate at the National Medical University at the Department of Psychiatry, Narcology and Sexuology in Ukraine. Her basic specialization in psychiatry was done at the regional psychiatry clinic in Zaporizhia, and she has obtained her master at the Medical University in Zaporizhia, and now she's working on her PhD dissertation. So we are ready to hear Anna, and we're looking forward to your presentation. Thank you.
I'm very happy to greet every one of you. I'll talk about quite interesting and quite discussable topic today, so I hope someone will have questions. So I guess let's start. Okay, let's see. So, before we will talk about non-chemical addiction as something specific, let's start about addiction in general. First of all, talking about addiction, we should clarify what do we mean when we use this term. Because if we look up, for example, to National Institute of Health or National Institute of Drug Abuse as its part, we'll find out that addiction is defined as a chronic relapsing disorder characterized by compulsive drug seeking and use despite adverse consequence. And in most of the medical dictionaries, we will receive the same description. But as we all know, someone can be addicted not only to some drug agent, but also to some activity. So the definition I've just given to you is just a heritage, pointing to how it all started. So, in the beginning was the word, and the word was narcology. And naturally, in the process of the evolution of traditional old-fashioned narcological discourse, ideas of intensifying the sphere of competence of narcology as a discipline gradually began to arise. And it turned out that the drug addiction component is not applicable to the abyss of both existing real and possible hypothetical addiction. In this way, the formation of addictology gradually took place with its subsequent nomination and attributive design, a new psychodiscipline, in fact, focused on the pathology of the predominantly volition sphere in its conjugation with instinctive sphere, since we're talking about painfully disturbed drives. It's even more correct to say about the defeat of the cognitive sphere, implying to the pathology of both motivation and drives, and anomalies of the volition regulation of the latter. And the articulated defeat of the affective sphere, of course, as well as secondary specific changes in all other mental spheres. So these circumstances, the organization of the clinic around spherical psychopathologies with a neglect of characteristic and more previous in etiology, emphasizes the belonging of narcology to psychiatry as its integral part, so as well and addictology too. But on the other hand, addictology is born from the need of culture, the need to compress and correct the social behavior course of consumer society. What can be considered as non-chemical addiction? Because there are like here sayings like everyone is addicted to something. Where do we draw the line? Because in addition to classical forms of non-chemical addiction well known before, addiction associated with abnormal changes in usually physiologically indifferent types of behavioral acts are now becoming more and more common. I'll now explain what I mean. We all know what listed here, those type of addiction, I don't know, gambling, everything related to it, online, offline, casinos, poker, slot machines, lotteries, you name it. Betting, sport betting, which is now becoming more and more popular, and old-fashioned, like, I don't know, horse racing, cockfighting, I don't know. Not so popular right now. But now becoming more popular, like online and offline gaming, including pathological passion for video games, for example. And while they in relation in a previous position, internet and computer addiction, I also have a huge part to tell you about it, but a bit later. Also, excessively temperamental process of acquiring material goods like abnormally intense or large-scale shopping, omniomania, or even pathogenization of a hyperphagic or hypophagic type. But some non-chemical addictions still remain unseen, and unseen both by therapists and by the person who suffers from it, the addiction bearer. We cannot call this person a patient because usually they never reach psychiatrists for help. They even do not understand they seek, and sometimes only their really close relatives can understand that something that was okay before is a problem now. We can talk about obsession with work, so-called workaholism, with professional pursuit, with excessive exercising, which is usually accompanied with addiction to very strict healthy diet. Also, preoccupation with viewing pornographic materials, which replace normal form of sexuality and is often associated with auto-manipulation. So-called pornography mania, we had an excellent report about that just yesterday. Excessive passion for sexual life, sex-separated satyrazis and nymphomania. It's funny, or maybe sad in other ways, that satyrazis and nymphomania are not really really like popular. We do not see it much in clinic, but we see a lot of pornography mania now. So as real sexual addiction deceasing, pornographomania is rising. Reading addiction, lectomania, also not really popular now, but now more popular are addiction to TV shows, to videos, especially on some networks like TikTok, YouTube, and so on. Socially potentiated passion for traveling, like dromomania, which displays other types of leisure activity and sometimes reduce labor productivity, and so on. So, it can be stated that non-chemical addiction are distinguished according to the principle of the presence of any manifestation and forms of activity, drives and desires, thoughts and aspiration, which in a not excessive form are normal and ordinary. Well, everyone buys something, sometimes a lot and for future, and these are not always rational action. A penchant for good cuisine gives out education, and an excellent appetite is a sign of a good worker and simply of a healthy person, usually a good-natured one. The game is an important element of the formation of a person as a subject of culture, and sexual manifestation reflects the nature of a person and underlies the reproduction of its kind. Some of these activities, while one maintains them at a moderate level, are even encouraged, such as reading, physical education, broadening one's horizon, acquiring communication skill, and multicultural coexistence, and also, above all, work. So, passion becoming addiction, how do we define? In order to verify that someone has gone too far with a certain activity and now he or she is addicted, we should answer two main questions. The first one is, does this activity improve one's quality of life or worsening it? Because someone that caused so much pleasure today now may be just deteriorating, like, I don't know, a dream turning into nightmare. And the second question is, how does this activity affect one's social life and daily routine? Can this person still have time to work, to sleep, to get food, to communicate with his friend, with his relatives? Because sometimes even the essential needs are forgotten because of those predominating activities which has become an addiction. Particular importance belongs to the involvement of the individual in the communities formed in between addicts that have their own communicative and behavioral norms and styling that creates a wide field of introspective, ethological, and psychosocial aspects of the functioning of their adherents, requiring clinical, psychological, and psychosocial analysis. It leads to a bunch of negative consequences: communicative isolation in reality, like lack of communication in a family context, tendency to minimize the social contact outside the communities surrounded around the addictive activity, tendency to prefer remote forms of communication with previous environment in case of such a need, opposite egocentrism, like the priority of choosing activity with unsystematic increasing of the acquired knowledge about it, but sometimes out of utility context, and categorical rejection of the common behavioral stereotypes, antagonistic attitude to the normal forms of the collective activity. So, probably the intensification of the process of non-drug addictogenesis is a consequence of social reflection in relation to the phenomena of psychoecological transformation of the cultural environment, which are shifting emphasis of didactic strategies with the cultivation of the phenomena of permanent information hunger, expansion of marketing tactics exploiting emotionally accentuated and psychologically affiliated mental response patterns, growing tendency toward forced opportunistic hedonization, instilling into entire population theologically defective worldview system and lifestyles of consumerist kind. So, culture gives a push to every addiction that exists. Most of the young people would do anything to impress others, and some of the adults too. But what culture places on the top today can be so outdated just tomorrow. Because, for example, 10 years ago, ICQs and blogs on the special website were so popular, and now almost no one uses them. When people want to have a blog, they use Twitter or Instagram or TikTok or video blog on YouTube sometimes. When they want to communicate, they use also Twitter, WhatsApp, Messenger, and other communicators. So it's now changing very fast. And when one cultural potentiated addiction ceased, other arises. And sometimes addiction are changed, like not the subject of addiction, but the mode of its implementation, like like everyone is pushed to gamble through endless online banners, like you visit some website and those banners like bad, gamble, we have pokers, we have online slot machines, it's everywhere. You try to watch the video, you have those banners, you try just to read some information on websites and there are those banners, they're just endless. So sometimes not the subject of addiction does change, but just the way of its administration. And also old-fashioned casinos are now not so popular because they're hard to reach, partly because of COVID pandemic, partly because of strict laws in some countries. But online gambling is very accessible, like everywhere. Now I'm coming to a second part of my presentation. It's about patterns of internet addiction, of internet use. We've been studied patterns of internet use by YOS using a special questionnaire to see the patterns. Why do they use so much internet? How do they spend their time there? What they want to find there? Which personal qualities do they have? And so on. So now I want to present you the preliminary data of this. The first internet addictional pattern we've discovered, we've called formally communicative. The exploitation of internet connection has a character of instrument of communication. Priority is given to the internet communities, centered on the process of transpersonal communication with the presentation of personal identification, like social networks. Predispositional personal features that they have, like they are all sociable and self-confident individual. The situational environmental settings are so that communicative predisposition in the form of social contact with the subsequent simultaneous loss, moving to another city, excessive business, work, COVID pandemic, maybe some other features, some other obstacles. And what due to chronological stereotype of exploitation, it's continuous, it's predominantly during the period of high activity of the communities, like evening or night hours, or maybe sometimes daytime at weekend. So there are just people who lost the ability to connect with their friends or relatives or the people who matters for them in a normal way. So they use an internet a lot to gain the communication they need. So the next one is compulsive type of internet addictional pattern. Those people use internet during the off hours, and it has a character like of Russia election. Priority is given to the communities with unilateral communicative advantage and to specialized information exchange services like email. What about predispositive features? Those persons are persons of high efficiency, of high responsibility, even sometimes pedantry. What about situational environmental setting? The nature of work associated with an active exchange of specialized report, like work in the field of internet marketing, commercial, intermediation, coordination, and organization activities. And what about chronological stereotypes? Those short sessions throughout the day with minimum of the familiar stereotype of the order of visiting internet resources. So now we are talking about people who use internet predominantly for work, but they use it extensively, and when they go home after work, they still use internet now for recreational. So they just spend the whole day on the work and sometimes part of the night. That's why it can cause a problem. And the third type we've called autistic. Those people are aimed for the implementation of unilateral keenness, priorities given to specialized information resources. Those people are characterized by aiming for self-improvement and cognitive activity, and imperative ratio of high activity in the process of schooling, low level of social communication in a public grow are present in the people who use internet like this. And according to chronological stereotypes, those people use continuous long session and individual convenient time. So we now talk about people that are not autistic like autistic disorder, but people who are not prone to social communication, who are extremely shy, who do not have friends in real life due to some obstacles. So they find themselves only through communication in internet, joining some internet communities, doing some activity. So their life is very different. They have more active social life in the internet than in real life. In the internet, sometimes such people even can become popular, and no one in real life would believe that this person can be interesting, popular, because they are too shy to expose themselves in reality. So then, okay, I see I have a lack of time, so I'll tell you now a bit shorter. Utilitarian communicative pattern are for people who use internet predominantly during the periods of high communication activity. So they have friends in real life, they have a lot of life, a lot of everything's going on, but sometimes they are just so sociable that they cannot stop. They come home and they still goes to internet to gain more and more and more communication, more and more everything. And the next one is alternatively motivative. Those people have some certain point to use the internet. Some do this for virtual sex, some doing for joining thematic communities, some do it for some activities they are ashamed of in real life, so they want to hide it and they can do it only online. That's the reason why they use internet connection so much. And the last one is creatively narcissistic. Those people are nowadays known as bloggers. They post everything they can produce, like whatever photos they have, whatever videos they make, whatever thoughts they have, they just need to post it, to share it with everyone, to make sure that everyone pay attention to them, to every bit of what they think, what they saw, and so on. That's the reason for using so much internet. So, sorry, I forgot. The last one is recreational type. I guess everyone could guess what it's all about. Those people just watch too much movies, too much TV shows, using internet. They look at funny kittens. They look at someone's photos from vacation, and they do it all through internet. And it's all okay until it doesn't take too much time of theirs, that it can they become less productive, spend less time with the important ones, and in that way their life can become a little impaired. So I'm almost in my time limit. Thank you everyone for your attention, and does anyone have questions?
Bardzo dziękujemy za tą prezentację i zwrócenie nam uwagi na...
Thank you for drawing our attention to other types of behavioral addictions that are perhaps less popular in this public narrative as well as in research. Thank you very much for shedding some light on a characterization or characteristics, attributes of internet users. Perhaps you, ladies and gentlemen, have some questions or some comments related to this presentation. Any questions, ladies and gentlemen?
Thank you so much for your presentation. But I was wondering, is something more cultural according to the place where you live? I mean, did you notice in Ukraine, for example, a special among all these behavior addiction, if there is one of them which is arising more than the other, which is most impressive, that you have to take care more in the services in the clinic addiction, except the gambling?
Well, if you mean like in relation to other countries,
Yeah.
unfortunately I cannot answer this question because I'm not really well educated about how is the currently situation in other countries besides Ukraine, so I cannot compare.
No, but just, I don't know if you work, you are a PhD, but you know about the clinic work or so.
Yeah, of
You
course,
have
of course.
patients coming mainly for which behavior addiction? Pornography, internet, video game, which should be the prevalence? I mean, the one most
Usually,
important.
when people realize that they are addicted, it means they have something severe. And what we had the most are pornography addictions and internet addictions.
Okay. Thank you.
Other people usually do not realize they need some help, but sometimes their relatives comes and ask, "Oh, please, can you help someone who's close to me?" But as everyone know, you cannot help the person who doesn't want to receive the help, and if they just do not want to come to me, there is no way for intervention. I cannot come to their houses and start some treatment, unfortunately.
Okay, thanks you.
That's why that's such a problem. Okay, thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Thank you very much. Now it's time to listen to the presentation of Dr. Michał Bujalski. Professor Bujalski, together with Professor Klingemann, will present a presentation on disorders, addictions, or behavioral addictions. The findings from the research just 2021. He's one of my colleagues from the Institute of Psychiatry and Neurology, but he also works at the Institute of Applied Social Sciences at the Warsaw University, and he authored a number of publications on perception and communication of risks in the area of addiction and public health. Thank you very much for your introduction. Am I not too loud, ladies and gentlemen? I just can't really use a microphone on a tripod. When I hold it in my hand, it gives me more sense of control. And yes, that's what we're going to talk about, the sense of control. I will present the findings from the research just 2021. Unfortunately, Dr. Klingemann couldn't be with us today, and she also participated in this research. So, ladies and gentlemen, I need to give you a word of warning. First of all, does it work? Can you see the slides changing? Okay, so I just need to tell you something in advance. I wouldn't like to disappoint you. However, before we proceed to linguistic dimensions, those suggestions and terms that we included in our dictionary, we will need to go through the cultural context. We'll need to discuss it a bit more in detail so that we can get to where we are at the moment, to cast some light on the reasons and the origin, actually, of this research. So what is an addiction? Historically speaking, where does it come from, this term? When did it emerge in the course of history? Researchers and scientists claim that this is a very specific cultural construct, that it emerged through the modernization processes and positions itself a bit in a contradiction to this liberal society that cherishes freedom so much. It places some emphasis on the issue, the notion of control. This is imminent to the modern capitalism notion, something that Mr. Bell described so well. So the major criterion for addiction is the loss of control. I'm not talking here about clinical or socio-cultural criteria. Some political, economic, cultural changes triggered expectations, social expectations related to an expected level of self-control and responsibility.
It was expected that this self-control level will be higher, that we will take responsibility for our individual actions. It became actually a requirement in the modern capitalism, but also it was related to some concerns regarding the ability to perform social roles and functions. If our control mechanism is not effective, then we won't be productive as part of the system. We won't contribute to the society in a way. So the history went on and on until the 1990s, and a very well-known researcher has spotted a phenomenon which she called the process of addiction attribution. So she has noticed a regularity, that this notion of addiction started to stretch over new categories of behaviors, and the catalog of individual and social damage has been extended. But also, in parallel, there was some erosion of the criteria which used to be considered characteristic and key features of the phenomenon. For example, the withdrawal symptoms and building up tolerance. It's a very interesting example because it shows that there is a trend that we could see in the research of health sociology. If some category, if some attribution becomes more popular, like FASD, the alcohol fetal syndrome, yeah, I think that's the correct name for it. So the more this diagnosis was common in the US, the more common the medical professionals ignored some of the symptoms and treated them as a symptom of fetal alcohol syndrome. So coming to the, sorry for this small digression, in the 1990s, all of the habitual behaviors which were characterized by the lack of control and avoiding some repetition, they started to be called addictions. So we started seeing the addictiveness feature in those behaviors. I think it's quite difficult to translate it into Polish, so it's better to say it in English, but let's stick to addictiveness for a while. At some point, it ceased to be perceived as a feature of a substance like alcohol or other psychoactive substances, or as a feature of behavior, and it was noticed more and more that there could be some social harm associated and other factors, cultural, economical, and political, which bind certain phenomena and provide an umbrella term of addiction. So we might say that the understanding of addiction is a continuous process. We keep updating our understanding. It includes behaviors, it can include also some events. So today we are seeing gambling, shopping, sex, sunbathing, social media, and this shows to us how the modern social and cultural processes have updated the term of addiction by involving more and more phenomena under this umbrella term. But on the other hand, capitalism as a discourse cultural formation, which has contributed and has provided a context to this ideology of self-control, it has also, in a way, rationalized the process of building some phenomena which have this addictive potential. And it makes it more effective to trade goods which give satisfaction. David Coltrane, an American historian of addiction, said about limbic capitalism. So capitalism producing products which involve us even more, which facilitate compulsive behaviors, because we are expected to keep using those products to make us absolutely ingenious customers and consumers. As I promised, the linguistic aspect. So, what's the situation in Polish? In Polish, we have a lot of chaos in terminology. There's a lot of polysemy in here. The language is extremely important in the context of addictions because language affects our perception of reality, but it can also produce harmful stereotypes and stigma. I think we all realize what I mean here. But coming back to the entire system of terminology, we can talk about terminology indicating a nature of this phenomena. We can talk about the description of disease units and so on, using the terms such as addiction, use disorders. So we are referring here to the classification of disease. But on the other hand, we have a tendency to use a language which is more vague, which is less deterministic, which carries less load. But on the other hand, it's balancing on a very thin edge related to the norms, related to the potential stigmatization. So here we are talking about terms such as problem use, excessive use, habit. It's very hard to define the extent of those terms. But at the same time, all these new phenomena that I have shortly described are oftentimes named using some terms which come directly from this well-established traditional cognitive dictionary based on substance addictions. So actually we are going through a very interesting thing, the problem of translation and understanding the phenomena that we see. Most of the studies that we use come from the English-speaking countries, come from across the ocean. So there is some challenge that we are facing here because we want to use these terms in the right way, like addiction, addictiveness, because addiction and dependence is not the same. So there's no equal sign between them. So it's similar to the situation if we look at the perception of disease in Polish. Do you know any synonyms for disease in Polish? Okay, we could talk about. In English, we have three terms which actually make a reference to different ways of thinking about disease. We have sickness, so that actually facilitates this social aspect. We have sickness, which is our subjective feeling, and we have a disease, which is the most medical and specific term for a disease. So I'm talking about this because I wanted to tell you about some way of thinking that we have used based on the terminology used in various international classifications. And now the last thing, which is sometimes painful, the style. Well, the language that meets two criteria, which is adequate and which is non-stigmatizing, very often is associated with the problem of this opaque periphrase, like problem involvement at work, technology use disorders. Well, they are very long, and if we said this to journalists, they would say, what? You should have one word, which is like a buzzword when you talk about it. So that's the difficulty in terms of language when we talk about addictions. And the terms that we suggest are sometimes really not easy to make associations, to pronounce. They are not really buzzwords, but maybe that's also a big advantage of the language that we use. So, what did we see in the year 2020? This is a collection of the terms, of the expressions that we came across when we were analyzing the branch journals. So we looked at the journals, we have reviewed the titles, we looked at press headlines that were published between 2010 and 2020. And now take a look at what you see here. The so-called traditional addictions, the substance addictions, they are characterized by having many more expressions relating to the person who is addicted, less expressions related to the phenomenon itself, but the trend is reversed when we talk about behavioral addictions. If we look at internet and the so-called new technologies, then the trend is really clear. We have 105 categories to describe the phenomena related to addictions to new technologies and compulsive behaviors, but only 4 pertaining to the people in question. So just look how the language is dynamic. It's more about the phenomenon rather than the person, and the more established language is more about the person in question rather than the phenomenon. So if we talk about these traditional substance addictions, we have more linguistic possibilities to talk about people, and we have much less terms to use when we talk about those new behavioral addictions, when we talk about these addictions to certain behavior patterns. And now, the last thing before I go on to discussing my linguistic suggestions, this is the moment when the American classification DSM-5 was published that expressed a change in the paradigm concerning the naming, but also the perception and creation of a phenomenon of addiction in the medical discourse. I could say addiction in inverted commas, because it's not a pure addiction, it's a phenomenon that we started to term differently. Why was it the case? This was related to a very simple process, actually, but on the other hand, the process sometimes is overlooked, because the mechanism of generating knowledge about any phenomena is open. We've got facts, and on the other hand, we have our considerations, and the considerations influence the perception of facts. So No scientific fact is closed. The study in science shows it undoubtedly. Everything is open, everything is mobile, everything is performative, and the language also creates a reality. It's not only a description of reality, it's also an active factor in generating the reality. It's an actant, to use such term. Everything that affects our mood, our perception, can become addictive. So addiction is not a specific unit. It's not a feature of a substance or behavior. It's more of a point at a continuum which is mobile, which is stabilized by a network, by a way of generating knowledge. For example, medicine. Oftentimes we make a reference to medical categories, and we also did that in our proposals. So another thing is about norms and pathologies. We don't like the term pathology, but listen, this is a term which is used regularly in the medical language. It was transferred to the language of public discussion and it became really stigmatizing, but it's still there in the medical vocabulary. I think it's there also because this term refers to two aspects. On the one hand, it's referring to the norms, institutionalized norms, and on the other hand, to normality, to the normal condition. So it was normal and it became normalized by social and medical standards. It refers to some objective criteria, the criteria that have been measured that show some model of behavior.
How is it possible? Well, for many, many years, if not centuries, we have been monitoring the health condition of our society. We use various statistical methods and indices, and we can analyze the population through the research, and we can come up with the norm. So we can define what constitutes excessive use of a smartphone. What does it mean? What is normal use? How can we define and determine it in an objective, unbiased manner? This norm and this pathology, they can never be precisely and accurately defined. Another issue is associated with this dichotomy, dualism of dependency. Either you are dependent or you're not dependent. So it's this binary nature of dependency. In DSM-5 classification, American classification, which is currently binding classification, dependency is perceived as a certain stage in a continuum of a behavior. So we have this notion of substance dependency, and it is replaced by a broader term, disorders of substance use. At the same time, we define the level of severity of its symptoms. So it can be either less severe or more severe. But what we are trying to do by this is going beyond this binary nature of dependency, dependent or not dependent, and nothing in between. In DSM-5 classification of all those phenomena that are behavioral phenomena, gambling was the only one considered a diagnostic phenomenon. Healthy lifestyle, healthy eating, hoarding, various other things were considered that are considered addictive are not present in DSM-5 classification, despite the fact that they refer to a certain objective loss or harm, a subjectively experienced harm that is experienced by people who often contact us because they need treatment, because they want therapy. But in DSM-5 classification, it was established that there is not a sufficient number of diagnostic criteria to include these phenomena in the classification. How much time do I have left? Okay, I should be able to make it. So let's start from broader categories, behavioral addictions. Please pay attention to one thing. These are just proposals. So it's not that we are saying, now you need to learn it all by heart and you need to apply these guidelines. No, what we're trying to propose are certain suggestions that, in our opinion, describe a phenomenon and people involved in it in an unbiased, non-discriminatory manner. So we're not talking about behavioral addictions or substance addictions. In our research, these addictions were considered stigmatizing. So basically the word addiction, it was considered stigmatizing. We should talk about behavioral disorders instead. It's a broader spectrum of behaviors which have attributes or signs of disorders of various severity. However, they do not meet all the diagnostic criteria of dependencies. Another proposal, so we have those behavioral dependencies, those not uncontrolled activities that domineer a person's life, the sense of urge, despite of the occurrence of negative consequences, a given person still feels the urge to continue a certain activity. Those harms involved are very often associated with the participation of the third parties, usually the nearest and dearest of a person in question, and in those new classifications, they should these phenomena should be called behavioral dependencies. Now, another issue is gambling. Well, we should avoid the term problem gambling. Instead, we should use risk gambling as a term, or harmful gambling, depending on whether the harm is present, whether this particular behavior entails specific harms, or it is associated with a high likelihood of occurrence of such harms in the foreseeable future. So at the moment, there are no negative harms, but if this behavior continues in the future, these harms are inevitable. Another issue, pathological gambling. As far as I can remember, in one of the translations of DSM classification, there is still pathological gambling mentioned, alternately with gambling disorders. We suggest to avoid pathological gambling, and we could use here addiction, gambling addiction, or being addicted from gambling. I have a couple of slides more, so perhaps I will not go through the content of each and every one. You can have a look at those most important issues. I will highlight them so that I can make it in time. The next thing is probably of most interest to me. New texts. What does it mean, new texts, to you? Why are they new? Are they still new? If they actually emerged 5 or 6 years ago, are they still new? For whom are they new? So what is the reference point here? And actually on the previous slides, I think I presented this catalog of terms, of notions, referred to or related to technologies, and it's really broad. It's really vast and extensive. What often comes up there is this addiction from use, yes? So it's addiction to using a smartphone, or excessive use of a smartphone, or excessive use of a technology, or cyberchondria, so on, so forth. In our opinion, we should avoid such terms. Instead, we should draw the attention to the problem. So we can talk about problem use of technology, a specific technology, for instance. We've had this really interesting experts discussion that revolved around this particular proposal. What is a technology? A smartphone, internet, an application on your mobile phone? A specific thing, a specific feature in this application. So what do we actually refer to? What constitutes a problem? Is the fact alone of owning a mobile technology is a problem? If so, then the applications or the devices are not a problem. But a device enables us to use an application. Very often we are so glued to those devices that it's really difficult for us to shift to another device and use the same application with this another device. So maybe we are actually hooked on a device. So we suggest instead to talk about problem use of technology or problem use of this specific technology. And here we specify what technology we mean. Important thing, these phenomena do not have signs of dependency in a clinical sense, but they can be tied to some negative health consequences and social sequelae. Another category that is very, very often present in a media narrative or in press is phonoholism, netholism, pathological use of a smartphone, so on and so forth. These terms are not appropriate at all and terribly stigmatizing. They often are used in relation to young people, young kids, which means that we stigmatize a large proportion, a couple of million at least, of people in a population. So we can also talk about disorders of technology, or yes, the disorders of using the specific technology. Some people say that we should use the word use, or we can use the word take advantage of or exploit. Sometimes we have a problem of a similar kind while talking about other types of substance. For instance, can you use an alcohol? Actually, no, you can use an alcohol if you want to disinfect something, right? So can you use a smartphone? These are those semantic nuances that remain an open issue. But to be on the safe side, let's talk about disorders related to a specific technology. I need to rush on because I'm running out of time rapidly. I think that we are just about to wrap it up. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, one of the most popular terms describing behavioral dependencies, sexaholism. Nothing attracts the public's attention to more extent than the use of this term. Well, this must be interesting, people think. That's great. That's captivating. Addictive sexual behaviors, wow. So I would rather suggest we use compulsive sexual disorders or disorders of sexual behaviors instead. Excessive involvement in work, another term. What does it mean, excessive? What is workaholism? What constitutes a workaholic? So again, problem involvement, engagement in work is something that we suggest. Shopaholicism, we suggest compulsive shopping. So all these behaviors were not reflected in international classification, including ICD. The newest version of it. And the last thing related to the classifications, this is the issue related to eating patterns. Let's not talk about eataholics. Let's talk about disorders of eating or disorders related to eating habits, but not eataholics or something along these lines. Last 3 slides. How to talk about a person? A pathological gambler? No. A person with a dependency to gambling? an addictive gambler, a person with gambling disorders, or a person that is involved in risk gambling or harmful gambling. Well, perhaps it's a bit too long or not that easy to remember, but we can try to do it. We have those people who use technology excessively. We can apply the term problem use of technology. Let's not say netaholic, but a person dependent on technology, on internet. Same applies to the use of technologies. We do not use the term sexaholic. We talk about a person that has compulsive dependency to sex. Same applies to workaholic. We do not say a person excessively involved in work. For some employers, that'd be a true treasure. And we don't use the term shopaholic. We use the term a person that compulsively buys things, shops compulsively. And the same applies to eating. I've just mentioned that a second ago. And the last slide, just to wrap it up. We've come up with 10 principles. So with Dr. Justyna Klingemann, I decided to share with you 6 of them. And they are associated with the dependencies to certain activities or to behavioral dependencies. Actually, the term behavioral dependency is criticized by some experts. It doesn't sound good to some people. They suggest that we should talk about dependency to activities. So what is the first rule? Let's not use this binary approach. Either you're dependent or you're not dependent. No. And let's talk about dependencies, always in plural. Activity dependency. This term should be applied exclusively to those phenomena that are scientifically proved according to binding diagnostic criteria. Just the last 3 points, ladies and gentlemen, bear with me, please. Now, shopping, exercise, etc., they should not be described with using cosmetical categories of dependency. And the last thing is this issue of norms and stigma. When we talk about technologies, we should be extra careful, because if we use the wrong language, we can stigmatize young people. But also we can foment this social panic and resistance to change, to cultural change and technological change. And the last thing, let's avoid stigmatizing terms and notions in terms of pathology. So let's not say pathology. Let's not talk about excessive behaviors. Instead, let's use the word problem. So let's say, for instance, that we use the term problem use instead.
I'm sorry, but time is up. Thank you very much for your presentation. That was a really interesting presentation that pointed out to a number of details when we are talking about addictions and dependencies, when we talk about the phenomena and the people. So, do you have any questions to our speaker? Well, if you do, I would like to refrain with a Q&A session, because now we are going to listen to Fulvia Prever, who is a practitioner psychotherapist who specializes in families, in women's addictions. She works for a foundation. She's involved in a number of initiatives regarding the involvement of women in gambling. She's the author of a number of publications related to women's gambling. And Fulvia is going to talk about behavioral addictions among women. So the floor is yours.
For inviting me. Very interesting, the question of language before my presentation, because I think that the language is just a question of how you define society. So let's go, can you go back? No, wait, okay. since I was inspired by Peter 3 years ago, he made a whole presentation with pictures and paintings. I decided to start with painting me too. And starting from Modigliani. Modigliani is an Italian painter in 1970. So in moment where the culture was not so ready for his painting, he painted especially women. The 80% of his painting are about women. And these women has particularly feature. They had long neck, which is supposed to be the characteristic of being sensual and seductive, and they had no eyes. Modigliani always paint people in general, but especially women, with no eyes, with no definition of the eyes. Why? So we say the long neck is his idea. He loved women a lot. He was a Latin lover. He had a lot of women, and he had a difficult relationship with the other sex anyway. And this idea of having no eyes seems to represent the point that you couldn't paint the eyes of a person, of a woman, if he couldn't reach the soul, her soul. So this is something that struck us, and that's why we decided for this painting, which is a different original interpretation of a Modigliani painter, which is the one of a female. It's a particular of the one of the snake, the women. A female, beauty, sensual, elegant, powerful, but fragile, melancholic, erotic, transgressive, but still inaccessible, so not reachable. And that maybe was the point. And we decided for this painter to be the cover of my future book that is coming out now about women and behavior addiction. So, why? Every time I have been here many years ago, for many years, each year I come to make a presentation, except the pandemic where I did the presentation online, and talking about women and women in gambling and now women in behavior addiction. And I was just thinking yesterday, but why we keep on talking about female specific and many aspects, including health, and then we always forget it then when we work, and when we make research, and when we make our clinical work. Why we keep on, and I have to keep on talking about this, because I think there is something there is a point which is not a secondary point, which is a first primary point. So in research therapy, diagnostic tool, policy of prevention and treatment programs, we know gender approach is not recent. I mean, it's 30, 40 years we're talking about gender approach in medicine. And it's widely recognized as a fundamental in any health prevention and treatment program in health. So we know, for example, about cardiology, diabetes. So we know that women are different. They react differently to medicaments. They have different symptoms, for example, in cardiology and heart attack, you know? And the problem was before that you didn't recognize the specificity of this symptom, you would lose the patient, for example, wouldn't cure the woman in a proper way. So if this is so recognized and true in physical health, why it's not true in mental health, in addiction? We know, for example, that the difference between women and men are really in diagnostic elements and symptom and their reaction. And so why? Why we go on? Even in these years, in many conferences, I think I have the honor to meet a lot of very important researchers. Some of them are here too, and then people well-known, very, very keen. And male and women, and when we talk about research, for example, I always make the same question. They are all exhausted to answer me. But you say this and this and this on this phenomenon, but what about female? Do they react the same way? Did you find the same data? Do they have a different perspective? And we look at each other and say, oh, who knows, maybe we have to check. It doesn't mean that the research don't have sometimes even a female part of the analysis of the data, but the perspective you should be different. So I'm trying to define this very shortly because I don't know, we don't have so much time, but just the main thing. When we were in Tokyo, when I was in Tokyo, for example, and we made this presentation, we made an article, Ether Wardle, Hing, Breen, and many other authors, and me, so I was the less famous of all of them. But it was a very nice presentation because we tried to describe why standardized screen tools for problem gambling, for example, give a very low amounts of female problem gamblers data. And because generally we say, okay, because we don't have women in the sample sizes are too small. But is this, or they're not large enough to take a look at female problem gambling? Why? Because women don't experience at the same level of difficulty as men? Or whether these screens are not the best tools for picking up the types of problem that women experience? So, do they fit to describe women harm? This is true in gambling, it's true in all behavior addiction. Now I have seen in these new books, which is enlarged the perspective from gambling to other behavior addiction in women, that all the authors all over the world say that it's not just in gambling, but all the other behavior addiction, that they find out that the screening tool, the diagnostic criteria, don't exactly fit to describe women harms according to the dependence, to the addiction. And so, for example, in gambling, as a consequence of this, we see that generally we identify in men, typically young men, who has a main focus at the primary risk, and we don't take into account, for example, women, old women, as now we are starting to do, as Bernadetta knows. So, we know that this systematic bias in gambling research is continuously reinforced. And this ambivalence in exploring intervention from a gender perspective reinforces the status quo. A very short idea you have to think about, for example, that gambling disorder was diagnostic, well, the first diagnostic criteria were in the SMR3 and then 4 and 5, and the one of the SMR3 came from the first study of Custer, of American veterans, male population. And they were extrapolated, and they say that what works for men should work for women too, but it's not this way. So even Rosenthal and Lezier, who make another work for DSM-4 criteria, they have a population of 3.1 ratio men and women, but there was no discussion about this analysis, separate analysis on women and men. So to which extent the final recommended criteria best represent the experience of men and women? So if you think about this, starting from this point, if we now start to think that even from the criteria that could be something different, could be something we have to change, that could explain why we have underevaluated and underestimated the female population, for example, in gambling, who suffer from addiction, and so on, no? In others. So this is just the first idea. So why gender approach? And we had this discussion starting from the 10 points that James Horton, which is the director of Lancet, made about, in general, that women health, and so gambling and behavior addiction, is unseen and invisible. And why any specific women dedicated approach in health is not supported and promoted. And we open up the question and discuss about why gambling and other addiction is gendered, and what could we do differently from now onwards in our research or clinical activity that would make the difference. This is that, and to be short, what we found out that the shame, what he told Horton said, that shame and stigma and systematic bias reinforce women's invisibility in gambling and other addiction. So shame and stigma is more or less the problem underneath all or the lack of integration between organizations to address this issue, collective force of women to mobilize themselves, little female empowerment and organization. If you think about, for example, in gambling, when you have a patient, when you have all the Gambling Anonymous telling about their story, they have at the end of their parkour, generally men coming from anonymous gambling, tell their story to reinforce their program and the happy end of their therapeutic process. While you don't, when a woman finally makes a treatment and ends up and don't gamble anymore, she just want to forget it and don't want to talk about this anymore. And she want to have a private space. And so it's completely different, even the way that they can talk and say and announce that there is a gambling problem in women. So this is true in all the other disorders, not just in gambling. And the idea is just to question about gender discrepancy, an issue And that's why our network, when I started with the first book Gambling Disorder in Women, who collected 20 chapters about all different places in the world from the 5 continents of women, researchers and clinicians who would talk about other women suffering about gambling, we found a network, international network, and now it's growing and growing and growing. And I hope will grow even more with you and other people. And we just try to find the gender discrimination an issue, and we try to reinforce this idea of having a different perspective when we talk about women's health. That's the new book came out now, it's coming out now, it's from another book from Routledge. This time 31 chapters from all the continents, so a transcultural and female perspective. A female perspective, not because it's just a feminine question, but I know the first chapter article I read about gender issue were of Helen Hing, Nellie Hing and Helen Breen. I know both of them, then I changed, who wrote how much is important to have even a different way to make research. For example, with when you talk about women, for example, using deep interview, not just quantitative but qualitative point of view perspective, and how it was important that women could work at this research, just to have a different way to take a look. Now, and we know that this, even in the therapeutic field, and we know when you have a gender group, as I have in Milano, gender group of women with a gambling problem, let's say, with gambling disorder, we know that women can, with other women, express better what is underneath their addiction, because it's not just a question of gambling, or the addiction is just the point of an iceberg, but underneath there are other problems, relational problem, violence problem, trauma problem, and then, and more or less, how to say, relationships were not well, I mean, very dysfunctional, and you have to work on them more than on the gambling problem and the other addiction. And this is something that women show very clearly in their addiction process, that you have to work what is underneath and not on the strategy just to stop gambling or other. So, the other thing was very important is in the book that we have to have new way, dedicated intervention to outreach women with gambling and behavior addiction, because we know that the main problem that we don't have data, that we don't see women, and no women asking for help, no data, no problem automatically. And we know every clinic that women don't come to ask for help for many, many reasons that generally explain now. It will not take internal and external barrier and obstacle that prevent them to come. So we have to find out new way to reach women, more accurate diagnosis criteria, therapeutic strategy, prevention program designed to intercept female risky. So this is very important. And if you don't work on the dysfunctional part, you won't leave the gambling or the other behavior addiction underneath. Then Evelina Kowalewska makes a very nice chapter on compulsive sexual behavior in Polish treatment. Things how really different things can be in addiction, which is traditionally a man addiction, but if you really observe things and you know how to observe, you can see how women are affected from this addiction too, and how it's difficult for them to ask for help. Deborah Blanca from Argentina tells about queens of oblivion in the women gambling to cope with COVID stress, because some of this chapter talks about COVID too, because we were in this period. And Liu Chen in pornography problem use, the gender difference in a female population in authoritarian stigmatizing context, like Chinese one. No, she's in Hong Kong, but anyway. And then there is a chapter, she's in China. Artemis Long in Hong Kong, non-suicidal self-injuries as behavior addiction, a huge problem in young Asian female population, no? That anyway don't look for help too. So many, many more. Something very short on pandemic. You already presented some of these ideas last year. We know in Italy, I talk about Italy because the context, the cultural context is very important when you talk about addiction or any health problem for everyone. In Italy, but I think all over the world, women pay higher cost in their personal and professional life. They were the real heroes of this pandemic, taking care of family, health, daily children care, elderly care, working as a majority. In Italy, the 66% of the health working force, it's for women. So we have to, everyone was working in the hospital, had to split between the family and the risk of the infection, going back and forth from the, so it was really in hospital clinics and doctor and caregivers. So it was clearly shown during COVID pandemic, if further needed, that women health deserve higher attention and investment. It was a period, I don't say pandemic for all of us was a completely different period of our life. We experimented something that we never have seen before. And everyone in Italy would say this, andrà tutto bene. Everything will be fine, okay. We have to say this and to think about this, especially with children. We have to reinforce their hope. Not things were really not going so well, but we have to believe it. And COVID represented for women who had very dysfunctional problem at home, and violence increased was a real problem because the domestic violence increased a lot, and women who had a gambling problem had because gambling was not available, physical gambling, they couldn't even move and go coping for this stress. They were trapped at home and they couldn't have a help if they don't have a therapeutic help. So mainly just want to say that what happened to them? Women with no therapeutic support was very different. They felt anxious, restless, feeling emptiness, more craving, and shifted to other medicaments as legal drugs, antidepressive, alcohol, food compensation, gambling online, if in younger age, very little in Italy, excessive use of social gambling, shopping online. And the future relapse after the closure we had on physical gambling when they reopened was clearly foreseen. But people who had women in our group or have an individual therapy had a sense of relief. They were feeling safer. And that allowed them to stay at home with no craving, to experience alternative to gambling as cooking, staying with relative children, go back to old hobbies as knitting and painting and reading and watching the movie. In Italy we say that there was the first time in our life that could be heroes just sitting on the sofa and staying there. We say, stay home, stay home. We work daily with women. We work online. We use WhatsApp. We use technology. And it was not easy for us. It was not easy for the women who were even 65, 70, 75 years old. But we did it. Just to have, to discover, to take a contact, to discover every day something new to do, like breakfast at Tiffany. Do today something new you never did before. Heavy lockdown and the closure of gambling venues was a real support for the recovery. For them it was, and that makes us know that if you stop, you can stop for a while in terms of times and distance from addiction. This can help you if you work therapeutically to distance from this. It allowed them to detach from gambling, elaborate new approaches to life. We share feeling and fears and joyful and building new resources. And then the turning point, we have several, the first, the second wave, the third waves. And what was, we saw that the first thing we saw that at the first wave, everyone was sticking together. We tried, as we did all over the world, no? Let's be together, let's be generous with other people, help each other, because we will do just, we save ourselves just in this way. In the group it was the same. Women stick together, they talk with each other, and so the stress activated a lot of energy. Then there was the period of there was summer, people wanted at least to go a little bit on a holiday, having a little bit of space. Then there was the second wave, the third wave, and the stress became strain. And the strain was not having this, we didn't have this energy anymore. So women, what we noticed in the group, the one who didn't have the gambling problem anymore, but keep on coming to the group just because they felt that we work on the quality of life, not just on gambling. So they started to say, we need to feel lighter, to feel not to hear anymore talking about gambling, about problem. We need to detach ourselves to do something else. So that's why, that's why we thought maybe we did something wrong. Maybe we did something wrong in our work, but we understood that this was a normal process. So they detached, and the group was very, very short, very, very little. So women just who had gambling problem and need our relationship, and then they came back again, and now the group is growing again. And we have several difficulties because the online period was bad. It was a bad way to hook new women, because if you can have the first contact in person, you can really respond to their need. It's not like this online. Not in Italy, at least I know Jacob in Sweden do it. In this future scenario, I think that online gambling in Italy will be carefully studied in a female perspective because they contain all the appealing element of privacy, coping mechanism to meet the women's suffering and possible hook them. So after the cooperation, individual need priority, then slowly came the idea that the group is a safe anchor and elaborate the grief, new resilience and future project. We lived in a dark period with no light, no stars. Desidera means without stars in Latin, desidera. So desiderium, desires, come out when all is dark and we need light. And women, I would say especially now, need to have hopes and dreams. Thank you so much.
Bardzo dziękuję za tą prezentację i ta książka wydaje się bardzo ciekawa i myślę, że podkreśla tak znaczenie udziału kobiet w badaniach i jakby też ta perspektywa kobiet lepiej pozwala rozumieć w ogóle zjawisko tych uzależnień behawioralnych. I czy mają Państwo jakieś pytania do Fulvii, jakieś komentarze dotyczącej prezentacji, czy chcecie coś Państwo powiedzieć?
Would you like to share anything with us, ladies and gentlemen? I think we have a question. I would like to thank you, Fulvia, for amazing lecture. Thank you so much, and thank you for paying so much attention to women when it comes to such difficult issues. In Poland, your publication, Gamblers, Female Gamblers, was translated into Polish. So I hope that you will allow us to translate into Polish your next publication.
Sure, I will. I was so thankful to Bernadetta because of the translation. We translated in Italian too, because we know that for some people working in the field in Italy, is in Poland, and even in Spain, for example, reading a manual in English is really tough. And so I think that the translation is another way to spread this culture on the gender perspective, and it's very, very important to take into account all the difference of the culture and even go towards them, not using always the language of English language. Perché sarebbe così bello parlare in italiano. It would be so nice to speak Italian sometimes, as you do Polish.
Bardzo dziękuję. Dziękuję.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank all our presenters, all our speakers. Now it's time for a coffee break, and then we will reconvene for the rest of our session. Thank you.
Działa. O, przepraszam. Dzień dobry Państwu, nazywam się Magdalena.
Good morning. My name is Magdalena Rowicka, and it's my great pleasure to host this session. This session is about gaming, but also relates to gambling. We're going to have 20 to 25 minutes per speaker. We're going to start with Dr. Łukasz Wieczorek, then followed by Dr. Andrzej Cudo, and then our Spanish colleagues will follow. If you have any questions after the presentation, you can ask your questions right away. If you are not ready with the questions, we'll can ask them at the end of the session. We have to stick to the agenda very strictly because we really need to finish at 12:30. If there is any very vivid discussion, we will have to move it to the coffee break. So I would like to invite Łukasz to present his results from the study that he did together with Katarzyna Dąbrowska. They both come from the Institute of Psychiatry and Neurology. So without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Łukasz. Thank you very much. And thank you for inviting me. I would like to share the results of the study that we have done together with Katarzyna Dąbrowska. Our study was related to the risk factors of transition from playing video games to gambling. And our presentation will pertain to the qualitative aspect of our study, and it will focus on the qualitative analysis of risk factors from the perspective of players and people showing gambling disorders. So first I would like to give you an outline of the theory and why did we start to get interested in this phenomenon in the first place. There is a number of publications which show that we have new games emerging in the digital market, which include elements of gambling and which might contribute to familiarizing such behaviors and which might promote the development of disorders. So the elements of video games which are similar to gambling are getting more and more difficult to identify by gamers. Also, gaming became a way to earn money, just as gambling is. So an Australian study has shown that most of the respondents said that the games like the social casino games were visually similar to gambling, and it was hard to tell one from another visually. 3/4 saw similarities in experience. Over a half of the players felt excitement at a similar level as compared to gambling, and 1/3 said that their experience from video games increases their skills in gambling. The purpose of the project was to identify the risk factors for transition from online and offline video games to gambling. And we have used the quantitative and qualitative approach. As part of the qualitative studies, we did 40 individual interviews. 20 were done with active video gamers and 20 with people who exhibited some gambling disorders who had previous experience in playing digital games. In the interviews, we asked about the types of games that were played by the respondents, what games they selected and why, their experience related to playing digital games, the similarities and differences between digital games and gambling, what were the elements encouraging to gamble, what was the availability of digital games, and what was the risk of forming an addiction. As part of the quantitative study, we did a survey using both the internet for digital gamers and a hard copy of a survey for the participants with gambling disorders. We did over 700 online service with the gamers, and also a number of over 100 of service with gamblers. We asked them about their experience with gambling and about their experience with digital games. As I said before in my presentation, I will focus on the qualitative aspect of the study. And the risk factors that I have shown in my studies were divided into three categories that might possibly contribute to forming a gambling disorder. The first category is similarities between digital games and gambling games. Then there were some elements of the digital games which encouraged the players to gamble. And then we had some elements of the games which actually promote a transition to gambling. Among the similarities between digital games and gambling, we have identified a number of subcategories. And in the eyes of the respondents, those factors also encourage them to gamble. The similarities between games and gambling was competition, the drive to win. Both gamers and gamblers are competitive. They want to win with the other participants, with the other players. Another thing was the element of chance, especially in the digital games where you had loot boxes, or when it's possible to get some extra items like equipment for your character or some skins to make your character look different. Another similarity between games and gambling that were considered risk factors by our participants. This was the difficult moments in the game when it's hard to manage, and in gambling this was the moment when you lose money. Another similarity was getting some benefits from playing. The gamers could sell their items to other players. They could sell their profiles to other players, and the gamblers, of course, they could win the stakes, and that was the benefit that they got from gambling. However, for both groups, the drive was to get some monetary benefit, to get some income. And what was experienced mostly by gamblers who also played video games, that was really an important aspect, that they knew the emotions associated with gambling, and they also could recognize the same emotions when they gambled. Another similarity between gambling and digital games was the risk of forming an addiction. Both gamers and gamblers were aware of the risks. They were aware of potentially forming disorders, especially in the online games because of easy access, and they also had a similar perception of loss of control. Since the games are so available, it was hard for them to control the time devoted to gaming. Another similarity was financial loss. In terms of digital games, those were financial losses related to buying loot boxes, premium accounts, buying skins or items for their characters, while the gamblers had suffered some losses when they simply lost the game and lost money. In both groups, playing games and gambling was an escape from reality. both gaming and gambling allows the players to get away from reality, to canalize their negative emotions. And both groups of respondents said that this is a similarity which could actually encourage them to transfer from one activity to the other form. In another category related to digital games which could promote the use of gambling, we have identified several categories. For example, gambling as a part of a digital game. So the respondents said that in the storyline of the game there are some options to gamble. For example, you could play roulette, you could play card games. For example, there are some elements of gambling which are embedded in a video game, in a digital game. And you could win some items which make the gambling more attractive, and also you could bet on the game. Inside the game, you could use items or virtual money to pay for your bets. So that was also encouraging gamers to gamble. Another gambling element in a video game were loot boxes. Loot boxes contain this element of chance, and the digital gamers associate it with uncertainty, and this is similar to an experience you might have during gambling. Also, advertising gambling in digital games, that was particularly encouraging for those who had some gambling disorders. That was an element which they considered a trigger, but also they pointed out that people who did not have any gambling problems wouldn't pay attention to the names of some betting companies or logos because they wouldn't know the context. So they wouldn't even realize that this is a part of gambling. Also, good results in a digital game can facilitate gambling. This is particularly true for a situation when you get good results in gambling, which is a part of a digital game. It gives you a false illusion that you could also be successful in a real gambling game. And the third category of risk factors were the factors that facilitated transition to gambling. One of those factors was the availability of online gambling. Both digital gamers and gamblers considered that this availability of gambling online creates a lot of options to get involved in gambling. There are no limitations. There is a risk of control over the time spent gambling. Another risk factor was the need to earn some money, especially when initially you get often wins, because then you start hoping to change your financial status, you hope to change your way of life. Also, the drive to experience strong emotions, to experience the game, especially under peer pressure, under the pressure of your friends who invested their own money to gamble. Another factor was the use of psychoactive substances, which weakened the control mechanisms and facilitated gambling. Other factors which facilitated the transfer to gambling were promotional activities of the operators. The operators simply offered additional money to gamble if you made a payment of a certain amount. Also, advertising was perceived as an element promoting the transfer to gambling. Also, winnings at the beginning of your gambling career and certain forms like the national lottery, playing with friends and betting money was not considered gambling. Scratch cards, they were also not considered gambling, and it could create this false illusion that you are actually not gambling when you are.
So let's proceed to conclusion and some of our findings. When we are preparing for this research, we identified a number of trials and types of research proving that there is a relationship between playing computer games and a wider propagation of gambling games and a higher risk of occurrence of gambling disorders. This relationship is explained by occurrence of similar attributes between gambling and gaming and the accompanying cognitive disorders. So we have a situation when those components of gambling are present in virtual games. In both cases, it is important to compete against other participants. Winning, it gives you an opportunity to escape your reality. High emotions are in place. Participants of a game go through frustration. They can be deeply frustrated. And there is this random component to the games. You have those loot boxes that contribute to spending more money on games. And one of the results of quantitative research is that the analysis demonstrated that people who actually saw the opportunity to increase their wins by spending more money, they were twice as likely to show disorders associated with gambling compared to other people participating in the trial. Now let's proceed to recommendations. An important element that helps us to curb, to alleviate these risk factors is to come up with this preventive strategy that would raise the awareness and educate people on risks associated with gambling, as well as hazards and risks associated with playing virtual games, and how that can lead to various forms of gambling. Operators of virtual games should place more emphasis on social responsibility and marketing strategies aimed at selling more products and encouraging consumers to buy games. In the case of social media games, more rigorous measures should be undertaken to verify the age of the participants, especially when these games available to young people contain components of gambling. Also, in the case of virtual currency, because this can create this illusion of a success, of some kind of win and achievement. Those young people, when they use virtual currency, they win. They do not spend their own money. So the risk involved is that one day they will actually use the real money instead of virtual currency because they're doing so well. And the responsibility of parents is quite important in terms of controlling what kind of games and how their children play social media games on their smartphones as well. Parents should also limit the access to their own credit cards if, for instance, children use their own parents' smartphones. That is all on my part. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. I feel that we have a bit of time to ask questions, or perhaps you would like to share with us some comments. Perhaps you have some practical comments or observations, or some that are more academic in nature. Thank you very much for your presentation. It was truly captivating. I know that you conducted the research, but I wasn't familiar with the findings. I have a question related to how we should interpret the phenomena that accompany or contribute to the emergence of these problems that you described? Because you talked about reasons, you talked about various circumstances around these problems. My question is, how did you identify them? Were you able to identify these circumstances through the research? Or perhaps you basically listened to the respondents who pointed to particular phenomena as the reasons for the status quo. It was rather the perspective of the respondents. So respondents will identify the factors that would contribute to the likelihood of the occurrence of such disorders. So we trusted the perspective of the respondents. And that is how we identified the factors, the risk factors contributing to the emergence of these phenomena. I will permit myself to share with you a comment. We've talked a lot about the responsibility of business as far as gambling goes. We also mentioned that there is this expectation to place more emphasis on the responsibility on the participants of virtual games industry. I think that here we have those two perspectives merging. So we have, for instance, such games as The Witcher. These are real player games or RPG games, and perhaps if such a game is available to minors, so kids below under 18 years of age, perhaps some of the gambling components in those games should be excluded. You mentioned that in your presentation, I think. Well, yes, you might not pay attention to it, but when you're deciding to buy a game like this, but you should make sure that a given game that you're buying for your kids does not contain those gambling components. So it is important. Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to ask Andrzej Cudo to take floor now. Andrzej Cudo came from Lublin, from the Catholic University of Lublin, and he will discuss some of the findings of his research related to the disorders associated with electronic games. And I'm very happy that Andrzej is here with us. He spent some time in Nottingham and Nottingham University with Mark Griffith. He worked with Mark Griffith, a very important person, an expert in behavioral addictions. Andrzej, the floor is yours. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy that I have the opportunity to present to you my presentation, which is about those early non-adaptive patterns and the electronic games disorders. I will start from the young concept, then we will proceed to the computer games disorders related to the use of computer games, and I will focus on pre-pandemic times. Then I will proceed to the samples in my tests from 2 void ships, and I have a longitudinal test to discuss as well that shows to us how early non-adaptive patterns are associated with the change dynamics as far as the level of symptoms of disorders associated with the use of computer games are concerned. So, proceeding to early non-adaptive patterns. Why we decided to focus on these? Well, it's just one of many patterns. Some of the research suggested that how people perceive the world and themselves, including computer games, is associated with the increase in severity of addictive use of computer games. From the point of view of practitioners, those cognitive behavioral therapy components are often applied in the therapy in treatment of people showing symptoms of disorders in using computer games. We wanted to see what domains, what aspects of these patterns are associated with the increase in severity of the use of computers, games, and related disorders. So going back to Jung's concept, we talk about this mixture of feelings, experience, beliefs, and they were developed in childhood. So this is about cognitive patterns of Beck and attachment patterns as well. It points to the fact that these patterns, they emerge very early in a person's, in an individual's life, also as a result of a relationship between a child and his or her parent. These patterns are fairly consistent, starting from childhood into the adulthood. In childhood, these patterns allow a child to survive, to satisfy their needs. When children grown up, these patterns are no longer appropriate. They no longer adequate. Jung came up with 11 patterns that can be grouped into 4 or 5 domains. The discussion about the exact number continues. I wanted to draw your attention to those 4 domains, 4 categories, and please focus on the weakened autonomy and lack of emotions and damaged boundaries. These domains are of our interest. So when it comes to the first domain, this is a group of patterns related to the life of a child when a child was not motivated to make their own choices and decisions. Whenever they did that, they were laughed at, criticized by parents, mocked and belittled. So that decreased the sense of self-agency in a child and contributed to the emergence of this image of oneself that is not fully worthy and self-confident. Also, we need to discuss here the expression of one's emotions and establishing objectives. That ability was impaired in a grown-up's life as a result. Damaged boundaries, that's another domain. Here we talk about the patterns that are associated with setting internal boundaries, lack of respect, in collaboration with other individuals, focusing on long-term own goals and controlling one's own emotions and impulses. In this particular case, when it comes to these domains, this is a result of the lack of sufficient discipline and guidance from parents, provided by parents. To a child, of course. Now, when we proceed to the disorders associated with the use of computer or electronic games, one of the older components by Professor Griffith is this particular list. So we have salience, we have mood modification, tolerance, withdrawal symptoms, conflict, and relapse. According to the professor, if you want to talk about a dependency, all these symptoms must occur. If only some of them occur, then we can talk about problem behaviors instead of dependencies or addictions. Going back to disorders associated with the use of computer games, this particular category was included in DSM-5 classification. Here we had 9 symptoms presented. 5 of them must occur in the period of last 12 months. And here I highlighted these symptoms that were included in ICD-11 classification. So again, these symptoms, all of these symptoms must occur within last 12 months. ICD-11, we have this 4 symptom. This is an additional symptom. So again, they all must be identified if we want to diagnose, for us to diagnose this particular disorder associated with the use of computer games. Now, what might be of interest to you is the fact that currently in Poland, we have at least 3 tools at our disposal adapted to Polish, and they are rooted in DSM-5 criteria. One of them is more extensive, more elaborate. You have those 5 subscales in it that help us to measure the symptoms of disorders associated with the use of computer games. And we have those short screening tools, one tool consisting of 9 items based on DSM-5 criteria, and another tool based on ICD-11 classification. These tools are adapted to Polish users, so they're translated into Polish. They have good psychometric qualities. They can be used as a method of screening. As far as the gaming disorders test in Polish is concerned, it consists of 4 items. We have 5-point scale. The cutoff point is 16 points. A person that has a score above 15 points is a person who may show symptoms of disorder associated with the use of computer games. In the case of a 9-item scale based on DSM-5 scale, the cutoff point is 32 points. But this is a more verified cutoff point compared to previous research. So from 32 points above, there is a likelihood that a given person has a disorder associated with the use of computer games.
So we used the scale based on DSM-5 because the adaptation of DSM-11 was just being prepared this year. All the methods are open source, so they could be downloaded from the website of their original author, Dr. Hali Pontes. You can look at the tab called Test Methods. They also have Polish versions in there, and they also have some articles about psychometric adaptation. You can also check the quality of the methods. So now coming to the first research, that was a paper and pencil type of research with a group of over 1,300 participants, and they declared that they have played computer games over the last 12 months. 673 were active gamers, almost 400 of them were women, and they were aged from 16 to 37. We were trying to verify which patterns were correlated with disorders in the group of males and females. I would like to point out that we have the results for male and female subjects separately, and the results for males and females were statistically different. If you look at the males, only the patterns related to weakened autonomy and no emotions were correlated with the disorder of gaming. Other domains were not statistically significant in that regard. So for this domain, weakened autonomy and lack of emotions, in case of male subjects, they made the subjects more susceptible to harm and to disease. So if you are convinced that some negative events could occur at any time and you won't be able to prevent them, this is the relation with the emotional entanglement, that you have the feeling that you cannot be happy if you don't form a relation with another person, and that you have to follow the will of others, otherwise you will face some unpleasant consequences. In case of female subjects, there was a relation of the incompetence domain, so the belief that the subject is not able to bear their own responsibility on their own, that they have to pass the responsibility to others, and this is also embedded in the domain of weakened autonomy and a lack of emotions. And considering that this research was one-off, we wanted to check if we are going to get the same results in longitudinal studies when we check the dynamics of change in the symptoms during gaming over a period of 9 months. So in this study, our study population was 1,500 people. However, for all the measurements, we were able to include only 500 subjects. Almost half of them were women. The age range was the same as before, 16 to 37. And the measurements was done between October 2021 and June 2022. We did 3 assessments, and the 3rd assessment was done in March. We were supposed to do the assessment earlier, but due to the war in Ukraine, due to the increased levels of anxiety and fear, we had to postpone our assessment so that it was not falsified by the international situation. Based on the result in our screening scenario based on DSM-5, we have developed 6 profiles. And those profiles were based on the analysis of latent classes, and the profiles reflect 6 groups. The first group is made of people who got low results and maintained low results in all the assessments. So we have about 4 groups in which the results did not change over the 3 assessments. So there was a maintenance group, but also there was one group which showed an increase in symptoms and a group which showed a decrease in symptoms. I mean here the symptoms related to gaming. And I should also point out that this group here is near the cutoff point for the questionnaire based on the DSM-5 criteria. So there were about 32 items here. Those subjects usually met the criteria of video gaming disorders based on the criteria specified in DSM-5. As a next step, we intended to see what are the differences between the groups. So why there was one group. Let me put it another way. Okay, so why one group didn't show any risk of gaming disorders, and what was the difference between that group and the other groups, especially the group which showed an increase in symptoms of gaming disorders, and the group that showed a decrease in symptoms of gaming disorders. So, in this case, where we looked at the no-risk group and the increased group, that was this emotional entanglement pattern. So that was the main difference and between the increased group and the maintenance group. And in the decreased group, we had a higher incidence of failure. Failure is your conviction that you are unable to achieve as much as the others because your level of competence is lower, your potential is lower. So that was more of our interpretation why we are seeing this. Why this pattern was related to a decrease in symptoms. If a person is convinced that they are not able to achieve due to their competence level, and if they use mobile games or online games in some communities, sometimes there is this tendency that somebody starts to play a game, starts to develop their skill level, but at a certain point they might encounter some negative reactions from other gamers. So you've started to build your character in a game, you reach a certain level, and this level is not very high yet. Other gamers have much better developed characters, and they start attacking you, and your character constantly dies, and you are strongly convinced that you are not able to achieve more in the game, your character gets killed constantly, you might start to withdraw from the game because you think you lack the competence to be better than other gamers. This was our initial assumption why this pattern could be related to the decrease of the symptoms. Because the games might cease to be attractive for such a person. And later on, when we compare the no-risk groups to the medium and high-risk groups, if we looked at the medium results in the questionnaires, which were maintained over 3 assessments, it was seeking for acceptance and appreciation. And in this case, the gamers were convinced that their value, their individual value, depended on the approval of their community, their social group. That could be the group of other gamers who will appreciate the achievements of an individual and see it as a contribution to the development of the game, to the development of a particular group, a clan. In the higher risk group, we also saw the emotional entanglement in there, and we also saw the element of lack of competence. When we compared this high-risk group to the no-risk group, we also had emotional entanglement, but also insufficient self-control and self-discipline, and the belief that self-limiting was not important, self-discipline did not matter. What's also interesting is that those two patterns might be connected to two pathways, the emotional entanglement, the emotional relation between the group of gamers, and the fact that insufficient self-control, the insufficient ability to control your behaviors was impaired. So those two mechanisms might have co-occurred, and if an individual was increasingly involved in a game, also their symptoms would increase in terms of gaming disorders. And as a summary, I would like to point out several things. First, there are not too many studies pertaining to gaming disorders and those adaptational schemes. So that's why we are very careful when discussing our results. And I wanted to say that when talking about gaming disorders, most of those patterns are related to one domain: weakened autonomy and lack of feelings. And those related to emotional entanglement, that your happiness depends on a close relation with a group of gamers, with another reference group. I should also point out that those patterns are often developed in the family when the child is not motivated to make independent decisions, and the decisions are being ridiculed, they are being criticized, and the child is dependent on the parent or caregiver. but the parent or the caregiver is not preparing them to make independent decisions, to make choices. And also that could reduce self-confidence and contribute to a decreased feeling of agency in such an individual. I would also like to point out, in reference to other studies that we did to investigate the relation between the problem use of social media, mainly Facebook, and the early patterns that occur. In those studies, other domains were important. In games, the most important domain was weakened autonomy and lack of feelings, while in the case of problem use of Facebook, the most important domain was the one related to impaired boundaries. And also the patterns that were included in this domain, so high expectations, looking for acceptance, insufficient self-control and self-discipline, were also related to more symptoms of problematic Facebook use.
So what we are looking for are those specific early non-adaptive patterns that will be characteristic for a particular group of behavioral disorders. So we can see here that we have other domains if we deal with Facebook use, and yet another group of domains when we talk about disorders associated with the use of computer games. And that is all I wanted to share with you, ladies and gentlemen, and let me again thank the Addiction Prevention Center and also the fund providing financing, the fund for gambling disorders. And thank you very much for this opportunity to share my findings with you. Thank you very, very much, and I would like to encourage you to ask questions. Perhaps you would like to share with us what your takeaways are from this presentation. Okay, for me personally, what came as a bit of a surprise, and this is a result of longitudinal research, when you have a decline in symptoms and you end up at the stage when there is no risk involved, this is actually no reason for joy. That does not mean that you solved the problem at its root. It might mean that you will try to compensate for the inability to resolve your problem somewhere else. So it's not that optimistic as we could expect. I have a question to you, Andrzej. This is probably the first opportunity to show the findings. These are the first findings of such research that we can have a look at. But would you share anything with the practitioners? What should they pay attention to? What should they control? What would be the most important takeaway for psychologists, for clinicists? I would probably highlight this coincidence between the relationship, this correlation between the relationship parent-child and self-belief, the belief that a child has as far as he or she is concerned about himself or herself, about the environment. So perception of one's worth, self-worth, and perception of others in an environment that can be associated to some extent with the topic of my presentation. The analysis that takes place through therapy, the analysis of those beliefs and convictions that emerge in childhood, is a good way to better understand your client, your patient with a gambling problem. So probably it boils down to this need to be part of a community, right? This is what you showed to us at the end of your presentation. Even if this community is a group of gamers, you need this acceptance. Thank you very much. And ladies and gentlemen, just one more thing. Of course, Andrzej emphasized that in his presentation. We have two tools, ladies and gentlemen, that you can access free of charge. A screening tool that is composed of 9 items. It can be downloaded from a website, and 4-item tool, which is a completely new tool, and soon we will confirm the cutoff point for this later tool. So you can use them still in work with your patient and in your scientific research. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, now it's time for the third presentation during this session, and I will try to read their names properly. Silvia Tejera Osuna and Rosa Santolaria Gomez. Our colleagues from Spain are psychologists and psychotherapists. They work in the center that is focused on the therapy provided to people with various addictions, including gambling addictions. And Sylvia will talk about development of a tool that we can use, we can apply to test disorders associated with the use of digital, virtual, smartphone games. The floor is...
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation to FEJAR, to this Congress. We are very pleased to be here, so thank you very much. And also, I'm here representing FEJAR. However, even though I do the presentation, I wasn't one of the people who created the test. It was my colleague, Rosana, and also other professionals. We are funded by the government of Spain, so we also are thankful about that. And yeah, I'm going to start now with the presentation. Nowadays, we are in a world that the video games are available in practically all the electronic devices, in computers, tablets, consoles, mobile phones, so it's very accessible. In 2020, the total spending on video games in Spain increased by 18%. That, well, compared to the previous year, that according to experts, the COVID and the lockdowns had an effect on this increase. And in 2021, it increased by 2.75%. According to research, there were 18.1 million of video gamers in Spain in 2021, and the interesting fact is that it has been a reduction in the difference in gender in video gaming. The average time of use of video games in the Spanish population is 8.1 hours per week. That is similar to France and Italy. There are obviously very good benefits, beneficial benefits for using video games, like educational purposes, health purposes, even for socialization nowadays. But also there are harmful effects of the video game use, like when a person spends too many hours playing to video games or the use of video games cause like negative consequences in the person or in their lives, then obviously that's not so positive. So here, as he has commented, the latest versions of the classification of mental disorders, the DSM-5 and the CIE-11 includes video game addiction. However, in the DSM-5, it still needs further research. Does video game addiction exist or not? Well, some people argue that it doesn't. However, in FEJAR, we say it does. It's a behavioral addiction and it requires diagnosis and a specific treatment. That's very important. So FEJAR, for those who don't know us, that's probably almost all of you, we are a federation. We are integrated many organizations all around Spain, organizations that previously they worked by themselves, helping people with gambling disorders. So we decided to come together and to unify it and to help each other to help in a better way to gamblers and the people with problems. What happened that in the recent years, there has been an increase in people requesting help for an excessive use of video games. So in 2017, we thought that we were going to extend the help also to other behavioral problems and addictions, because before it was only gambling. And we found that there is no evaluation instrument validated in the Spanish adult population because we treat adults in FEJAR. So obviously also these instruments allow us and our organizations to unify the criteria for diagnosis and also to take same steps of actions about treatment. So these are some examples for the Spanish and international population of video game addiction detection instruments, but this is only for children and adolescents. And these ones, as he has talked about them, the problem of these instruments is that they are not validated yet in the Spanish population, so we couldn't use it. So I am not going to talk about this, he talked already, but yeah, this is like the typical profile of the pathological video game player according to the DSM-5. And then the main objective, the creation of an assessment instrument validated exclusively with the Spanish adult population. That was our main goal. Firstly, we created a questionnaire of 97 items. It was experimental. It was just to see, to analyze the data we obtained with that and to go further in the investigation, in the research. So we included 8 items of control and also 2 items of comorbidity with gambling disorder. And the possible responses were true and false. So we had 2 main groups, the one of video gamers that in theory they had some problem of addiction or excess of use of video games, and also the control group, that it was from the general population. Well, the drafting of the elements, we created them based on the DSM-5, on our clinical experience, and also through some articles and published works about psychopathology and video game addiction or video game. So, well, they are very similar to what he said, so consent, abstinence or withdrawal, tolerance, dependence, loss of interest, psychosocial problems, deception, evasion, loss of opportunities, the control items, and the comorbidity items. So we also used a personality test, the Hexaco-PIR, and we conducted the research online via Microsoft Edge, and the participants had to sign digitally in order to be able to participate in the experiment. This is the beginning of the Hexaco-PIR. So the sample collection, we look for people either face-to-face, digitally, or through social media. And then we sent them to the website of FEHAR. There we had a link that they asked them for some data, like name, email addresses. And then once they completed that, we sent emails to those possible participants. We sent one with a consent form, and if they completed that, we sent another one with a link accessing the questionnaires. So the first phase to get the sample, we started with the video gamers. In theory, they had some problem of use or abuse using video games. We got 23 participants from massively multiplayer online role-playing game and multiplayer online battle arena. We also knew some gamers. Whilst they were playing the game, they also commented other friends, other gamers about our project and if they were interested in that. And also in our organizations, all the people who went to ask for help for an excessive use of video games, we also told them about the experiment and asked them if they wanted to participate. So the criteria for the participation was that there wasn't another addiction, only to tobacco, and they couldn't have any mental illness. So the ages were between 18 and 49 years. And then in the second phase, we got a sample from the general population, and the conditions were to have to be like an adult, to have Spanish nationality, and no suffering from any addiction or mental disorder. And we got 84 control participants. So the drafting of the elements, by the way, in the previous phase, we analyzed the answers and the responses of each group, and then we compared them, and we saw, we maintained the items of the people that they had more discrimination, and the ones with less discrimination, we excluded them from the final test. So in the final phase, we obtained a final 39-item questionnaire, and then we got more participants from the general population this time to perform this test, and also with the personality test. And then 1 month or 2 after they completed their first questionnaire, we got 66 participants to be retested of the general population sample and of the sample of the video gamers. So this is the test, how it looks like in Spanish. At the moment, it's only for the Spanish population. This is a sample of the questions. Okay, and these are the final elements of the test. We are not including the comorbidity anymore, and the control elements are only 3, no 8. So the statistical results show in pink. You can see the one on top of video games, and the one on the bottom is of the general population. And as we can see, there is no surprise here that the mean score of the general population was lower than the one of the video gamers. And in blue, we have males and females of the general population. And also, the mean score of females was lower than for men. This is the control items. As you can see, there is no difference between the groups, so that was good. Okay, and here we have in pink is the graph of distribution of the scores of the video gamers, and in blue is the one of the general population. As you can see, in the general population, it accumulates in the lower scores, and in the video gamers it's more uniform. Here you can see the significant difference between the groups. And here we have in pink the male graph of the scores, of the distribution of the scores, and in blue the one of females. And as you can see, in males, there was more high scores than in females, that practically it was insignificant. So reliability, we check through the Chromebacks alpha for the coefficient, and we found that for the video gamers group is 0.86, and for the general population sample is 0.93, that both are good. And the correlation between the two halves of the addiction scale is 0.9, which, applying the Sperman-Brown formula, gives a reliability of 0.95. The retesting, we did the correlation, and the results showed a correlation of 0.953. That is very good. So we did a scale to get a standard scores, and we constructed this through the data, the sample of the general population. The mean age was 42.67 years, and the standard deviation was 14.60. 46% were men, 54% were women, and the scale scores are given in the standard scores, as I said, with a mean of 50 and a deviation of 10. So, and there you can see the formula. So we used the personality test to see if there was any difference in personality between the video gamers and the general population. And what we found is that there are a small difference, and only in some elements video gamers score lower than the general population. You can see there. Okay, so it is a self-administrated test. It can be done online or on paper. We do it online because we have in FEJAR an online platform that the people respond to the test, and the platform automatically corrects the answers. There is no time limit. We stress the importance of reading very well the instructions and the questions, and the examiner will ask the subject to write down a tick or cross, in the case of on paper, of the two possible options. T for true, that in reality in Spain is a V, or F for false, which they have chosen as an answer. So the control variable has a score up to 3, and the addiction variable has a score up to 36 points. And the correction can be done using the template or manually. For each true answer, there is a point. And also there are 10 items that are scored in reverse. So for false answers of those 10 items is 1 point. And the questions are alternated to avoid the effect of acquiescence in subjects' responses, and the items are also arranged in ascending order of severity, with the items being more neutral. So the interpretation of results, we recommend to do an interview afterwards to know more about the situation of the subject. In the control variable, if someone scores 1, you should be careful with the responses. But if it is 2 or 3, then we consider that the questionnaire is uninterpretable, because it can mean that there is problems of reading comprehension in the person, or there are personality problems, or simply like the person doesn't care about it, or they are just answer about it randomly. And in the standard score that we get from the scale, if it is between 65 and 69, people are suspected of have a kind of lack of self-control using the video games. And if it is equal or above 70, then we consider that the person has a problem. So, okay. You can also see the different elements of the test to see which areas are better or worse in the person, but obviously always those areas isolated are less reliable than the full test. This is the scale that you get, you do the formula and you get the standard scores. This is our online platform in which they answer to the online test. And this is when they complete the test, you can see the scores that the platform do it by itself. So we don't need to be calculating on anything. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Thank you. And now I'm a bit confused because I'm not sure which language I should speak in. But thank you very much for the presentation. You really worked hard to prepare a questionnaire, and I can tell myself that from generating the items, and you need a lot of items initially, and then you apply subsequent processes, you consult experts, you work with a study group, and you exclude some of the items to reduce their number. So I know how much work it costs. So thank you very much for the presentation, because it really shows how much work it takes to build a questionnaire like that. And I think it was a good idea to have the control questions. So if they get 2 points or 3 points in their responses, you know there is a problem with comprehension. Maybe they did it randomly, or maybe they just did not understand the questions. So maybe they have a different type of problems, and then you should not analyze the questionnaire further. I think that was also a very good idea to include those. So in Spain, they already have such a questionnaire. Maybe Spain is still waiting for an adaptation of such questionnaires because they could be used in comparative studies. But I think now you can use it for your patients, for your clients who come to you. So great job and congratulations. Do you have any questions or comments?
Two short questions. The first one, I don't catch it. You start with about 97 items, and at the end, how many items are selected?
Left.
I think is 36, but and the second one is when you choose the strategy to build your test with the previous items, you choose a strategy binary false true answers, and why not using a Likert scale?
Okay, thank you. ¿Lo has entendido? Vale, lo primero que pregunta que cómo consiste, bueno, que no le ha quedado muy claro la reducción de los 97 ítems a los 39, y la segunda respuesta es por qué elegiste la de verdadero o falso y no otras escalas.
Contesto la primera.
La de que no le ha quedado muy claro lo de cómo pasó de 97 ítems
Porque
a...
con el analista de datos, el doctor Roy.
With the analyst of data, the doctor
Rolf Fuste
Rolf Fuste
fue quien hizo el análisis de datos.
was who did the analysis of data.
Casi todos los ítems discriminaron muy bien por
Although
encima de
almost
0,40.
Almost all the items discriminated very well above 0.40.
Y seleccionamos de todos ellos los que mejor.
And then they selected the ones that discriminated the best. So it in percentage. So it went from 97 items to 39 items. 39, yes.
36, 36.
Well, 36, yeah, exactly, without the control items. ¿Que ¿Por qué elegiste verdadero y falso y no otras escalas?
Nosotros sabemos que se suelen utilizar más, como ha dicho el compañero, las de 5, pero bueno.
We know that it's more common to use the one of 5 points instead of true and false.
Consideramos que
but we consider
sería, más rápido
that it would be faster.
Y bueno, que sería más sencillo de responder para
And easier to respond for the participants.
Faktycznie czasami jest trochę łatwiej odpowiedzieć. Oh, sorry. Sometimes it's easier to answer yes, it did happen, compared to, well, rarely, sometimes, frequently, right? Or I definitely agree, or just agree, or I'm somewhere in the middle. Okay, so essentially it came from your experience also with your patients.
Yeah, well, obviously if it has 5 points, you can get more information through there, but yeah, we estimated it was okay, the 2 answers questions, like responses.
Fue un debate interno que nos costó tomar la decisión.
Yeah, it was a difficult decision to take, and it took us some time, but in the end is what we decided.
Thank you. Dziękuję bardzo.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. And that is all as far as this session goes. So I would like to encourage you to ask questions or share your comments also during the lunch break. I certainly hope that our speakers from this session will stay with us for the duration of the lunch break at least. So this break that is just about to come is a great opportunity to talk to our experts and ask them questions. So